Hi everyone, nice to be back. In 2019 I was here, so 3 years ago I was talking about our Asian hornet strategy, and nearly 4 years have gone by since then. So I'm going to give you an update on how we've done, what we've learned, and some of the big questions moving forward. Probably everybody knows about Asian hornet by now. There are three really main threats to this, and the big ones are biodiversity, particularly these guys, human health risks from being stung, and the economic costs. Basically, we know quite a bit about hornets, but there's still some really big areas that we really don't know enough of. When we're looking at the impacts on our island's biodiversity, we really don't know. Hornets have not been here long enough to see the impact on our insect life. But looking at studies in France, what we see is that they're actually not that fussy. They'll eat anything they can catch hold of. Particularly honeybees, they're an easy prey. The figures that scared me was the recent research from France shows that in one season, a large Asian hornet colony will consume 97,000 prey items. They actually counted them. And that relates to 11.4 kilograms of insects, so effectively 24-pound jars of honey's worth of invertebrates. That's just one colony in a season. So the impact that they're going to have on an island ecology where we're not going to get insects coming in from elsewhere because what we've got is what we have. So it has, I think, really important consequences. We need to know what our biodiversity levels are like, first of all. I think Miranda's doing some really good work to see what's the baseline. We need to then measure, if we can, the impact that hornets are going to have. If we look at the impact on human health, we're really fortunate. In our Guernsey Asian hornet team, no one's been stung yet in 4 years. One member of the public has been stung. An Asian hornet nest in a bird box fell on the ground, and she was accidentally stung while gardening. That's the only sting record that we've got in Guernsey, and we know it was a hornet because the nest was in the tree above. But if we look at France, we can get their figures. They actually produce a really good report every year, and the data in it is really tremendous. Basically, they've only had one death in 5 years, which isn't good, but I guess it could be worse. The biggest thing is anaphylaxis, or the impacts of multiple stings. And if you look on the right there, somebody had 23 stings. That's a lot of hornet stings in one go. 2018 was a hornet year. I think this year is also a hornet year. We'll see what the figures show later. But when you're having lower nests, and this is something that we're noticing, particularly evidence from Jersey as well, the lower that the nests are in the ground or in the brambles, the more chance that you're going to hit the nest or disturb it and get stung. So that's clearly something that we need to be aware of. In France, they're also getting nests in the ground itself, so not just in bushes, but underground too. If we look at the economic impacts, again, really difficult because I don't think we've got any figures yet. I don't know of any honeybee colonies in the Channel Islands that have been lost due to predation from Asian hornets. But in France, particularly Spain, Portugal, they are suffering loss of colonies, also loss of honey. If you look at the projections, and this research was done looking at the cost of controlling nests. So this is the biggest economic impact, is how do you deal with Asian hornet nests? You've got to treat the nest and you've got to remove it. The costs have been estimated for France and for the UK. It is big, big money. So we've got some serious questions there. Moving on to what we did. In Guernsey, we noticed that the first Asian hornets appeared in 2017. In 2018, from 2 nests in the first year, we ended up with 8 nests. So in the space of 2 years, we were then finding the population was starting to creep up. We looked at Jersey, their numbers were rising. They had them a year before us. And then we thought, we need to do something. We need to have an action plan. We need to have a strategy. And I'm really pleased to say that a really good strategy was produced very quickly. The Asian hornet strategy went before the states. They approved the funding for 3 years. They employed 2 members of staff, myself being the coordinator, and we had a strategy that was rolled out very quickly. One of the key things from that strategy was looking at what had happened on Alderney in 2018. They actually put traps out and caught 55 queens, which is a really big number of queen hornets to be trapped in the spring. So we wondered whether we could actually roll out spring queen trapping on an island-wide basis. It had been done in France before, but the hornets were established and the trapping wasn't done across an entire region. So we thought, Let's see if it's possible. So the map on the right shows the actual trap points. And we've now been doing this for 4 years, same locations, same number of traps, about 260 across the whole island. And what we've now got is the results of that. And it's interesting that having launched that island-wide, we're seeing, I think, some quite interesting effects. The traps are put out from April to June, so we're looking at a 10-week window. The idea is that any queen hornets that either arrive from France or emerge from hibernation, they'll be attracted to these traps and they'll be caught. There are issues with trapping, and we know about this. You have to have a responsible and proportionate approach, modifying traps where you can to reduce bycatch. The challenges are getting volunteers, because we issue these traps at the beginning of April and we collect them at the end of May. So it's quite a bit of work. We also want to make sure that people know what they're doing, that they monitor the traps regularly, because we don't want them left unattended. And then we lose about 7% of our traps each year. So that's the first phase of our attack, is really to try and catch the queens in the spring. Moving on from June all the way through to the end of November, we then have our Track, Don't Trample campaign, which was running the year before I started. And it's a message to the public which goes out with leaflets, flyers, posters, social media campaigns, press releases. And the message is, if you see an Asian hornet, don't kill it, because the chances are it's probably not a hornet. So what we're saying is, report it to us and we'll try and identify what it is. Most of our reports come through by email, and mobile phones are really important, but social media is increasing also. It's taking us on average 2 days to locate a nest from the first sighting. All the secondary nests that we find, such as this one, they're treated with Ficam, which is a very quick-acting, powerful chemical. We can take the nest down the same day, so within 4 hours, all of the hornets in that nest die, and we can put that nest in the deep freeze to kill off any pupae which could be emerging if the nests are actually left. Looking at the public sightings, we have probably not a great success rate. About 10% of the sightings reports we get are indeed Asian hornet, but I'm not too bothered, because negative sightings is just as important, because it means people are reporting, they're making the effort. This hornet mimic hoverfly is the biggest misidentified species that we find. We're lucky on Guernsey that we have low numbers of hornets generally, so we actually find that we get 2 peaks, one in the spring when the queens are emerging or arriving, and then we have a bit of a gap sometimes. It can be up to 10 weeks where we don't see anything. Clearly that doesn't mean that there are no hornets, it just means that people aren't seeing them. As the nest gets bigger, the number of worker hornets increases, and then people are more likely to spot them. So we get this peak later on, September time. It's possible to look at our figures over 4 years of spring queen trapping, and what we've seen is that fairly consistent numbers. On average, we're getting about 8.5 queens trapped per year. So on that table, what you can see, I've looked for the number of queens accounted for over the season, and then what percentage of those were caught in the spring by trapping. And it works out that approximately 85%, 86% of our queens we're catching, and therefore is a smaller proportion that go on to make the secondary nests. So we're finding that something like 1.75 secondary nests per year is what we have to deal with. So I think those figures show that if we can catch queens in the spring, we've got less work to do later on in the year. This year we've only had 2 secondary nests. We found 2 primaries, which are the small nests the queen makes, 2 secondary nests. The distribution over the last 5 years doesn't really tell us that much. They can turn up anywhere. The queens are the yellow dots, and you can see that it's pretty random. Probably there are more hornets found on the east coast, which would suggest that that's where they're making their first landfall. So now we look at figures that I've got through sharing data across all of our islands. As you can see, that our numbers are fairly steady. We're roughly finding about, say, 2 nests a year, and over the recent period, we seem to be keeping our population at a very low level. The assumption is that we're finding nests before the new queens have emerged, and that means that we're not having to deal with overwintered hornets, but we're just dealing with incomers from France. I think that suggests that where the spring queening is being done, it looks like it is a good strategy, but there are lots of other factors, so it's not always that clear. If we look at our invasion process, this is for any invasive species that might come into an island. You get an early phase where there's a window of opportunity, and this is where we're putting most of our effort in the springtime. Once the public see hornets, it tends to be when they're quite well established. What we don't know is what it looks like at the top of the graph. What does optimum abundance look like? When hornets become so well established that they start to flatten out, what will that look like? And what are the limiting factors for our islands? Is it about climate? I don't think it's that. Is it about availability of prey? Clearly there's plenty here for them. There are no predators or parasites. Competition doesn't seem to be a factor. So it's worrying. And if we look at the situation in France, this is fairly common, especially in areas around urban towns, by the sea, 3 and 4 nests in a single tree. As I said, our nests are mostly in trees, but if they become more prevalent lower down, then there's more risk of people being stung. So this is what's happening in France, 7.5 nests per square kilometre. In some places they counted 15 nests per square kilometre. Having a look across to see in Normandy what's happening over there, it's a bleak picture because their numbers year on year tend to be going up. This year, the figures I've had from Alistair, they've had 6,000 nests already in that part of France. And this is where our hornet queens are coming across. They're spreading each spring. We're lucky in that we're the furthest away from all the Channel Islands, so it may be that our numbers are low because hornets have to work a bit harder to get to us. If we look at the French figures again, this is their collective response to dealing with Asian hornet nests. They control the nests throughout the year. 2022 seems to be much higher already. We haven't got the rest of the year's data, but it looks like being surpassing previous years as well. As the summer progresses, more hornet nests are found. The worrying factor from this graph is that more than 20% of their nests are found in November. By then, the queen hornets have already departed, they're mating and they're hibernating. So basically what we're having to deal with then is the next season's invasion of hornets, which are coming our way. So unfortunately, although the French are doing a lot of good work to control hornet nests, it's not suppressing their populations, and it's certainly going to add problems for all of us as well. So the research from France says local control has a limited impact once the hornets are established. And that's the problem that we have now, is if they become established, what we're doing is basically trying to reduce the impact in certain areas. We're not going to actually turn them back and get rid of them. So the figures there, I worked out that if we get the same population densities in Guernsey, it'll be 480 nests per year. Then that's probably a low number. And the cost, that figure is probably way out because you've got to take into account tree surgeons, cherry pickers to get to the nests. You've got to have guys on the ground tracking and finding. So the costs are going to be absolutely astronomical. It's 18 years since hornets first arrived in France. And the questions really, I'm just throwing it out there, is can we sustain our efforts on a longer term enough to make a difference? Or are we looking at having to accept that this may be the future for us? What will it mean to live with this number of Asian hornets? I don't really know. Is the stinging risk to humans exaggerated? Clearly, I think there are massive risks, particularly with elderly and with children and with schools. So we have to think about the impacts of that. The biggest impact on biodiversity, we haven't got any estimates for, and we don't really know. We're waiting for technological solutions, we're waiting for biological solutions to come along, but nothing much seems to come out of France. There is research being done in Portugal and Spain, but a lot of that is on the science and the ecology rather than on the control and eradication. Good news for us in Guernsey is that following the publication of our 3-year review, which is online on the Asian Hornet Gov page, our committee were able to sustain our funding So it wasn't just a 3-year trial. It was now we're going to have this a long-term funding. So we have got budgetary money available to deliver that Asian hornet work. Good news for us in terms of the time as well is that the less time we spend dealing with Asian hornets, the more time we've got for other invasive species, which is why Julia's work yesterday and the invasive species action plan can be rolled out as well. That's the end of my talk. Sorry, it's a bit rushed.